panel and indeed in the audience here this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I can see people on the screen who've spent many, many years in solidarity with the Kurdish people. I'm looking at Mark, for example, who's been there at every demonstration I can ever remember over many years and shown absolute steadfast support for the Kurdish people. And it's also a pleasure to follow on from what Hishar just said. He is a fellow member of the Council of Europe with myself and consistently raises these issues as far as we can at the Council of Europe, and that is quite an important forum because it covers all European countries with the exception of Belarus, and is a useful platform for us to raise issues of national identity and linguistic identity, and indeed issues of survival. And then, of course, with that, the issues of aggression against groups such as the Kurdish people. And it is almost 100 years since the great betrayal of the Kurdish people at the end of the First World War, when there was a hope of a Kurdish identity being recognized in post-First World War Middle East and Europe. And that was dashed on the altar of a very strong Turkish state, which was in a sense a buffer between the Soviet Union and the West. And Turkey has always been supported by Western military interests in that respect. And of course, the membership of NATO, notwithstanding many, many complications, is actually quite an important part of that equation. The events that have happened on many occasions should be underpinned and understood in the context of decades and decades of discrimination against Kurdish people within all the nation states that includes Kurdish people, but in particular within Turkey, where there was no recognition of the Kurdish language, of Kurdish identity, of Kurdish organizations, and indeed many, many prominent active people in the Kurdish community ended up in prison or on trial and still do. I've never forgotten attending trials in Turkey in the early 1980s during the period of the military government, and attending trials later on of Kurdish mayors, Kurdish journalists, Kurdish lawyers, and so many other people, and the irrationality of those trials and the irrationality of the evidence that was used against them. And as Isha pointed out, large numbers of people banned from public office and arrested. Also, anyone else who's expressed dissent is also in danger of being arrested. The events of the Gulf War in 1991 and post the horrors of Halabja in 1988 did lead to the establishment of the Kurdish part of northern Iraq and a degree of recognition of that. That many saw as the start of a recognition of a greater Kurdistan and a greater Kurdish interest, or recognition of a greater Kurdish interest within a number of nation states, including obviously Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and so on. The Turkish state, however, has been unbelievably brutal in its treatment of Kurdish people within the borders of Turkey, but also constant forays over the border into the Kurdish area of Iraq, and now into the Kurdish areas of what is the national frontiers of Syria. And the brutality that goes with that is also matched by the lawfare that's used against Kurdish representatives within Turkey, the constant attacks on the HDP, the attempts constantly to ban the HDP, the refusal to recognize that negotiations with Öcalan are actually a path to peace in the future, and recognition of the Kurdish people are a path to peace in the future. And therefore, a number of us have constantly called for the release of Öcalan. It is, therefore, what we do for the future. how we deal with this. The Project for Justice and Peace, which I'm representing here tonight, was set up in order to deal in part with international issues and work in solidarity, not to take over, but to work in solidarity with existing organizations to try to bring about a long-term peace and justice. That can only be done by recognizing the totality of the problem. The oppression against Kurdish people, the oppression against the Kurdish language, the imprisonment of Kurdish leaders, the continued military attacks in Iraq, in Syria, and the continued imprisonment of very many Kurdish leaders. But it's also a question of the interests of the West in this. The interests of the West are to keep Turkey in NATO, to continue to supply arms to Turkey, even though Erdogan is buying arms from Russia and other places at the same time. And also the way in which Erdogan uses refugees as a sort of bargaining chip. And if he's not given sufficient money by Western Europe, then threatens to deport large numbers of refugees, Afghan and others, into Greece, and with all the attendant problems that Greece and so on face. It's not sympathy for refugees, it's actually often exploitation of refugees in the situation that they face. And so there are issues we have to face. But if the events that we're promoting this evening, the events that all of you work so hard on, do bring together a greater sense of unity of Kurdish people within whatever national frontier they have, and creates an international pressure to pull Turkish troops out of northern Syria and recognize the rights of Kurdish people within northern Syria, then that would be a huge step forward and help to bring about that sense of unity. And when Nilofer was talking earlier about the brutality of the armed occupation of Kurdistan in all its different parts, it just reminded me of the brutality of the occupation of Palestine by forces there, destroying 1,000-year-old olive trees, destroying watercourses, destroying villages, destroying communities, and destroying hope. And over the years, I've visited many parts of Kurdistan under different guises. And I just remember being in a village once near to the Euphrates, right next to the Euphrates River, which, and as you pointed out, the water wars of tomorrow are rapidly looming, was the way the school children described how the Turkish army had been and occupied their village at various times when there was military control of that province of Turkey. The way in which all the men in the village were told to lie on the ground and stay there until the army had completed its searches, the humiliation of the village and the taking prisoner of so many other people. We want peace. You only get peace if you recognize what the causes of injustice are, recognize what the injustices are, and recognize the inalienable right of people to their own self-determination, to their own voice, to their own language, to their own culture. And that surely is what we're about. And I think tonight's meeting is an important part of that. And there are more allies than you understand in Parliament, because they've been continually growing. It's changed a lot since 1988, when I asked colleagues to sign EDMs condemning the Kurdish massacre at Halabja. Some colleagues said to me, "Where is Kurdistan? I can't find it on the map." I said, "Well, you're looking at the wrong map." They said, "Which map should I look at?" I said, "Any one that was made before 1923. You would find it there." And so it is about understanding that history. It is about understanding that solidarity. And to the 400,000 Kurds in Britain, my solidarity, my thanks for what you do, my thanks for the way that you speak out, and we will continue to speak out with you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And thanks for your decades of support for the Kurdish cause and solidarity as well.